going on, everybody? Welcome back to Chuds BBQ. My name is Bradley Robinson, and today I'm going to show you how I made this beautiful, barky, tender, smoky, every trick in the book paper wrap brisket. Coming up! Over the last 10 years of working in and around the professional barbecue scene here in Austin, Texas, I have met a lot of people. I've worked alongside some of the biggest names in Texas, whether it's at the restaurant, during a collab, at an event, forming personal relationships with the pitmasters, ex-employees, current employees. Needless to say, I have heard it all when it comes to tips, tricks, and little secrets regarding how to cook the perfect Texas brisket. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you know I tend to keep it pretty simple. Salt, pepper, foil boat, clean smoke. It's really all you need to create a perfect brisket, in my opinion. But I have always wondered, if I applied all of these little tips and tricks and secrets, could I make the ultimate Texas style brisket? Well, that's what we're gonna do today, folks, and it is going to be delicious. This is a brisket. Tip number one for an amazing brisket is starting with an amazing brisket. This is an American Wagyu brisket from Snake River Farms, and believe it or not, I got this at my local H-E-B. This thing is a beast. A good trim is 100% necessary. And I know I've trimmed briskets on this channel many a times before, and I'm just gonna keep doing it because I kinda like it, and I think it's beneficial. Get that out of there. Get that silver skin off of there. Look at that marbling on there. Woo! That's why you want to start out with a quality brisket. Otherwise, you're in the turd polishing business. Whenever you're removing silver skin, too, always cut with the grain. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time. Yeah! Don't need any of that. That is going to make some good burgers. Again, mostly fat. You see right there, I'm getting pretty close to the meat. Good indication. So glad there's a bunch of roofing going on today. Oh, yep, there it is. Look at the marbling on that lean. Oh, this is gonna be good. Some places pound their brisket. Helps tenderize the point meat a little bit. I'm doing it just so it sits a little flatter. That is a nice looking, nicely trimmed brisket in my opinion. Clean on the back, rounded edges. Looking good to me. So down here in Texas, everyone says they put nothing but salt and pepper on their briskets. But I gotta break it to you, a lot of big name places put a little bit something extra in there. Sometimes it's just some garlic powder or some onion powder or something like that. But the majority of places that are trying to mimic that John Lewis style of barbecue use this. Bam! Lowry's seasoned salt. This stuff is pretty tasty. It's got some garlic and some onion in there, a little bit of sugar, I believe. And because it's seasoned salt, they can still get away with saying it's just salt and pepper. Kind of sneaky. So for our rub today, I'm going in with 2 parts black pepper, 1 part kosher salt, well, almost 1 part. Try not to look into the viewfinder when you're making rubs. And 1 part Lowry's seasoned salt. Simply enough, we're just gonna mix this all together. And you could put this in a shake bottle, much like this one. A lot of places do that. I'm not a big fan of the shake bottle. I think I have more control just by grabbing it. And I don't need to worry about the granules settling nearly as much. That's why I'm doing this in a quart container here. And there you have it, some authentic Texas barbecue rub. Next up, we gotta have something to help this rub stick, right? So we're going on with our mustard slather. You've seen me do this before. This is mustard and hot sauce, Frank's Red Hot. Pretty much in equal parts, just because mustard's a little too tacky and hot sauce is a little too loose. And you can use whatever you want as a slather. Traditionally around here, what you're gonna see a lot of is mustard and pickle juice, but I don't have any pickle juice handy. And I like the idea of mustard and hot sauce. You're not really gonna get much flavor out of this, but if there's a chance, might as well add something with some good flavor to it. Just gonna go at this pretty aggressively with our rub. Don't forget the edges, rookie move. And that is looking pretty good to me. Always start fat side down because this is your presentation side and you want it to be as pretty as possible. Again, you don't need too much slather. It's kind of why the mustard is nice because you can really see what you're doing as opposed to something like water or oil. Put it on there, tack it up real nice. God, this feels so weird. I haven't done a slather on a brisket in a very long time. And to be clear, we do none of this at Leroy and Liz. There we go, try and counteract the wind. Looking good. All right, I think we're just about there. Again, double check your edges. You want a nice even coat, maybe even a little heavier on the fatty side just because there's a lot more meat over there. All right, and there we have it. That is your Central Texas style brisket. Damn it. There's a snake in my boot. We are gonna rock this pit at around 250 degrees for the first few hours of this cook. And the reason for that is because the first 3-4 hours of any brisket cook is when the brisket is gonna absorb the majority of its smoke flavor before it gets too cooked. So by lowering the temperature to around 250 for the first few hours, it's just gonna be a slower process, a smokier process, and we're gonna get a little extra smoky flavor on our brisket. As always, fat cap facing up, fatty side towards the fire. We're not too close to the exchange. We're also not too close to the chimney because there's going to be a little bit of back heat right in this region. Right there is exactly where we want it to be. I'm also going to go in with a water pan. And the point of the water pan is that it adds humidity to the cook chamber, which is great because humid air is a lot more consistent than dry air, which is going to help eliminate hot spots in your smoker. And if you have multiple briskets going, you're going to eliminate some of the variables based on where they're sitting in the pit. And also having some extra humidity is going to help keep from drying out the surface too much. So if you're getting a lot of crunchy ends on your brisket, a water pan will help with that. And also, a humid environment cooks a little bit faster than a dry one. So this should help speed up your cook. This is a little pan I picked up at the kitchen supply store. You can find them online as well. You can also use a foil pan or a pie tin, whatever you got. So I'm gonna put it right at the exchange here, which is gonna help kind of block some of that direct heat and make sure this comes up to a boil or a simmer, adding a lot of nice humidity to our cook chamber. And while I'm in here, I'm also gonna throw in a blocking log. The point of the blocking log is quite simply to soften the blow of all the heat rushing into this pit. Basically, we're trying to protect this little end right there from getting blasted with direct heat because it's closest to the fire. So what this is gonna do is just kind of redirect the airflow to kind of come up and down and over this instead of the brisket taking all the full force. This is a great opportunity to go through your wood pile and pick some of the densest pieces you've got because you really don't want this to ignite on your pit. And also, if you pick one of these really green pieces, by the end of this cook, this will be ready to throw in the fire. We are about 5 hours into this cook. Let's see how this brisket is looking. So far, so good. Got some good color. Starting to get some pooling right in the lean as to be expected. So we're going to tip that, let that drain off a little bit. Still pretty tough. Not as good of a bark as I was hoping for. I mean, that's a slather for you. In between hours 3 and 4, I cranked the temperature up to around 275 and I started spritzing with this. Just your classic apple cider vinegar spritz. If that's too intense for you, you can also dilute it down by 50%, you know, half vinegar, half water. And also, look at this, blocking log, smoldering away. So I've been keeping that pretty soaked too. Again, that's why I don't like blocking logs. And look at that, our water pan is empty. I think it's time to fill it back up. Even briskets like beers. Will this affect flavor? No, probably not. Have I heard about people doing it? Yes. Beautiful. All right, so now we're gonna shut this lid, maintain temperatures around 275 degrees, and we'll check back in. Another trick I've heard of is some people like to throw beef fat into their fire around this stage in the cook. So I went through my brisket trimmings and I pulled out some of these pieces of soft fat from the top of the lean. And I'm just gonna start chipping these into the firebox periodically throughout the cook. Thought process here is that it's gonna give you that nice kind of char-broiled flavor. Something you get if you're cooking burgers over direct flames or Santa Maria style or even Chud box style. So supposedly it adds a little extra flavor to your brisket. So we're gonna try it today. Cooking with post oak wood today as usual, right on schedule, and look how clean that smoke is. That's what we're looking for the perfect brisket. Clean heat coming out, just whispers of blue smoke. Beautiful. Gotta say, I'm loving this whole throwing fat on the fire thing. Not sure how much it's gonna affect the taste of the brisket, but it certainly does smell fantastic. Great way to lure in customers. And hey, I'm sure you got plenty of beef fat lying around after trimming your brisket either way. Speaking of extra brisket trim, no need to waste it. Might as well make some burgers while we're here. Looking good to me. And if you want to learn more about burger making, you can check out my Chud Burger episode where I make a pretty mean cheeseburger out of brisket trim. Bam! Whole bunch of ground beef ready to go into the fridge. And as for the rest of this fat that didn't go into burgers and didn't get thrown in the fire, might as well make some beef tallow, right? Easiest, best way, send it right through the grinder. You can also just cut this up really small, but if you got a meat grinder, this is gonna make it as fast as possible and as the most efficient, meaning you're gonna get the most tallow for your yield as opposed to leaving it in big chunks. Perfect. From here, your best bet is to throw this into a pan and reduce it down, but I want to put a little smoke on it first. So, into the smoker it goes, just for a little bit. This is a little trick I picked up from Michael Wyant, who makes smoked beef fat tortillas. They're good. And having some smoky beef tallow around is never a problem in my book. We're about 7 hours into this brisket cook, and I have swapped my vinegar spritz out for a Worcestershire spritz. And what that's gonna do is really help with this color right at the end while adding some pretty nice flavors that are gonna roast and cook on there just for the next few hours. You could also dilute this with half Worcestershire, half vinegar, but I'm going straight Worcestershire sauce because I want to add those unique notes and get that nice darkening effect on the crust. So I'm going to spritz this for another couple of hours and then we're going to wrap it up. I also got rid of the blocking log because I've now got this pan of fat in there, but I'm a little concerned about this part of the lean getting a little too crispy. So I'm going to take one of these little pieces of foil here and just protect that edge because that's the driest part of the whole brisket, and I want to make sure that it's protected and stays nice and juicy. Woohoo! Still got it. We're about 8 hours, almost 9 hours into this brisket cooking. That behemoth has finally gotten through the stall. I could have wrapped it a bit sooner, but I really wanted to build that bark up a little bit because paper wrapping tends to soften the bark up. So either way, I got 2 pieces of butcher paper about this big. That's all you need. You don't need anything too gigantic. But I'm simply gonna take my spritz and I'm gonna get this paper nice and wet. And that's just gonna help with the wrapping, making sure everything folds a little easier, a little tighter. And when it comes to paper wrapping your brisket, it really could not be easier. First things first, we're gonna go flap over the top, sides in, trying to hug this natural curve right now. Same with this side. And then kind of tuck it in a little bit. And then making sure everything's nice and scooted back. We're gonna flip it over. Again, tucking everything in. And then one more turn. And we have got ourselves a perfectly wrapped brisket. I'm gonna throw this back on the smoker for another maybe hour or two. It's not gonna take long. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna aim the lean side towards the fire. This is another little trick I picked up along the way because the fatty part always cooks faster. So giving the lean end a little extra attention right towards the end here is really gonna ensure even cooking across the board. As for our beef tallow, it's been on there for a few hours, and as you can see, we've definitely rendered some fat out, but nowhere near as much as we can. So we got enough smoky flavor on there, so I'm gonna finish this off in a pot. You can also just do this from the get-go, which is what I normally do. If you wanna see that process, you can check out my Chuck burn ends video. Now we're just gonna let this cook down until everything is nice and crispy and floating. And that is exactly what we're looking for, folks. Nice and golden brown, not too dark. That's how you know you've got pure beef tallow, because you can't get this color unless you boil out all of the water and the crispy bits start to fry in pure fat. So unless you take it to this stage, you're very likely gonna end up with some tallow that's also got a water content, which is not what you want. While we're at it, we're gonna add a little bit more Lowry seasoning to the tallow, just for another layer of flavor. Now that is some liquid gold. We're at about 10.5 hours into this cook. Lightning. This brisket is reading right around 205 degrees, feels nice and jiggly, and it is time to come off. Feels very tender. So onto this sheet it goes. I'm gonna rest it down a little bit to maybe 175 degrees or so. And then into my oven it goes on its lowest setting, which for me is 170 degrees. And I'm gonna let it rest just like this until tomorrow. It is the next morning, and I'm pulling this brisket out to take a look at it, make sure it's feeling nice and tender, and see if it needs any more attention. This is generally how they do it at most barbecue joints. They'll put their briskets in the warmers around 10 o'clock, midnight or so. Then the next morning around 8 or 9, they'll go through, feel them all, make sure they're all feeling tender. If there's any that need a little more attention, they can bump up the temp of the warmer, and just make sure everything's looking right. And luckily, this is looking just right. Oh, that's incredibly tender. Got that jiggle factor to it. Bark is looking real nice. Clearly got some really good jiggle to it. We know this is super tender, but the real trick is to feel the underside. Feels nice and pliable. This thing is looking good. And it's at this point that they'll go through and add the tallow. That's what we're gonna do right now. I got this tallow that we rendered down last night, and we're just gonna dump some on, and that's just gonna make sure it's nice and juicy while it finishes resting. It's gonna give it that gloss and that sheen that makes all the photos look so good. Make sure nothing is dry on the cutting board. And now we're just gonna wrap this right back up into the oven for another couple hours, and then it'll be time to slice on in. All right, folks, I think it's time to see how this came out. One thing to bear in mind, even though I had my oven set at 170, this thing was holding around 160 the entire time, so don't be too scared if your oven doesn't get very low. Boom, big reveal. Oops. That looks pretty good to me. Hard to beat that, folks. Nice and juicy. Oh, you know it's tender. Yup. And yes, jiggle factor is there. I'd say that's pretty juicy. Burn end, don't mind if I do. That is so tender, so marbled. It's like cutting butter. I mean, what more? Let's just have a moment of silence for this piece right here. Nice soft bark. That's what we're after with the paper. God, it's so soft. Oh, I think it's time to give this a taste test. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Cockburn! You gotta get in on this, dude.
You can barely pick it up.
Yeah, it's definitely on the tender side.
Oh my God. It like barely can hold itself. That is friggin' delicious. So you pulled out all the stops on this one, huh?
All of them. Every one I've ever heard of. See how that lean came out. Looking pretty good to me. Holding up. Yes, please.
I think I like the lean a little bit better.
Yeah, it's a little less intense than its fatty companion over here.
The fatty is amazing, but I don't know how much of that I can eat. It is like,
It's rich.
it's super rich.
That Wagyu beef, man.
I have to say I'm regretting all the candy I ate right before I came out here. The thing I'm noticing the most different than your typical brisket cook is the bark is definitely a lot less crunchy.
Yeah, it's very soft.
It's the whole thing is kind of the same sort of texture.
Yeah, it's that meat jello through and through.
Yeah, if you like meat and you don't like this, there's something wrong with you.
That is indulgent, to say the least. Very rich, very flavorful too. All those little tips and tricks along the way definitely paid off. Usually the briskets I make that are just salt, pepper, foil boat is very beefy,
Yeah,
you know, smoky, kind of hearty. This has got a lot more nuance to it,
definitely.
and it's good.
It is good. Long day sweating in the shop. Eat some of this brisket, and be knocked right out.
Yeah.
It is a sight to see. Sight of beauty there.
Whew. All right, final tasting notes. It's really good. Incredibly tender, maybe even a little too tender. That Wagyu beef, you gotta be careful with it. Smoky, not too smoky. Can you taste the fat in the fire? A little bit. It's pretty subtle, and overall, it's just a bit more savory. I'm not sure if it's the mustard. It doesn't really taste like mustard. It doesn't really taste like Worcestershire or vinegar, but all of it added together with the Lowry's, just got a saltier, savory note to it, which is really pleasant, really good. One other thing is the bark. I went pretty heavy on the bark to try and keep up with it, so it held up pretty well, except for right here in the lean, you can kind of see where it was pooling a little bit, a little discoloration, but that's to be expected every now and then when you're wrapping in paper and with slathers as well. All in all, would I do it again? Absolutely. It's kind of fun just babying a brisket like this, doing all the different steps, pulling out all the stops. Is it necessary? No. You could do a lot less work and have something just as good, or just something that's different. You know, I really do like the crunchy bark, but, you know, it just goes to show you. There's a lot of different ways to get a good result at the end of the day. All right, y'all, and that is it. That is how to make the quintessential Central Texas style craft brisket. Big shout out to John Lewis and Aaron Franklin for popularizing this paper wrap method and just a sheer attention to detail. Without you guys, I would not be here making barbecue videos today. And again, I'm not saying that any place in town is doing all of these tricks. These are just things that I have seen in the kitchens and heard about from other cooks. So I wanted to put them all together and see how the final result came out. And it was absolutely fantastic. But that being said, if you give any of these little tips or tricks to try for yourself, be sure to let me know on Instagram at ChudsBBQ. I love to see what y'all are cooking. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out so much. Big shout out to all the Patreon members. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to afford 22-pound Wagyu briskets. Let me know in the comments down below what you want to see me cook next. And until the next time I see you, please go cook something outside. Peace!